Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are talking about big changes, or perhaps even some small changes, we could see in the now widely reported, theorized, and long rumored The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time remake. Supposedly we're going to be getting this later this year for the 40th anniversary, and we're not entirely sure what exactly it's going to be. It's not officially confirmed yet. We've heard that it's supposedly going to be a full remake. We've heard that there's going to be a big budget, so that can definitely give us some ideas. But if Nintendo is truly going back to Ocarina of Time again and remaking it in a modern way, what would that entail? So I decided what would be fun is if I go through the Ocarina of Time again, the N64 version, play through it in parts, and after each part, I then talk about changes we could see after seeing it again when it's fresh in my mind. So I just played the beginning of the game. I played through the opening, playing through Kokiri Forest, messing with the Kokiri, getting your sword, your shield, getting to the Deku Tree, breaking the curse, and seeing everything that transpires there before setting off to Hyrule Castle. That entire introduction to the game I just played right now, just a few minutes ago. It's fresh in my mind. And so after having played through this part, what changes do I think would make sense for the Ocarina of Time remake if Nintendo is going at this in a bigger way? That's what we're getting into today. Now, if you find yourself enjoying this video or some of my other videos and you haven't subscribed already, I would very much appreciate your subscription. But right off the bat, the first thing I think of that would definitely need to be changed, or will likely be changed, with this remake is voice acting. The opening of the game has the Deku Tree talking. There is a little bit of this opening monologue, which I think is really cool, and it's going to be very interesting to see it voice acted, but I definitely think that's what they would need to do. Bringing in voice acting into this game would make for a huge, huge difference here. This would really help to push the narrative. But there also would be a lot of challenges with this, because I would say that in terms of tone, Ocarina of Time is such an interesting game, and playing through the beginning here, I feel like they got so much right in terms of the tone, the feel, the atmosphere, and bringing in voice actors, depending on those choices and how they are executed, that could impact that tone, perhaps for the better, perhaps for the worse. So this would definitely have to be handled pretty well. Now, I'm not saying or expecting that there will be voice acting in every single moment. I think where it makes sense would be for the big moments, the big character moments. So yes, that opening monologue with the Deku Tree, pretty much all the Deku Tree moments, there's gotta be voice acting there, for sure. But even when Navi meets Link inside of his house, that moment I think is going to be a really interesting one. Navi's going to have a voice. Navi already had a voice in Ocarina of Time, but this will be expanded on because she does have some actual lines. And her role might actually be extremely important to the story in terms of making it feel impactful with the voice acting. Because you see, Link, like most other games, probably is not going to be made to talk. I don't think they should. But because there is going to be voice acting, because there are going to be these important scenes where there's character interactions, in order for there to be a healthy dialogue, you're going to need to have a dialogue, not just one-way monologues when they're scripted as dialogues. This is an issue I saw in Breath of the Wild, and the story was a little bit better in Tears of the Kingdom because a lot of it happened away from Link in the past with Zelda and the Ancients of Hyrule. But with Navi traveling alongside Link, you have a companion character that can handle a lot of that dialogue to allow the flow of conversation to feel natural during these important scenes. But it's not just Navi, it's not just the Deku Tree, also Saria. She's a very important character. She's Link's best friend. She's the girl next door. Literally, the girl next door. And so I imagine she's also going to have multiple scenes here that will have voice acting. She's going to be a significant character. And again, how these characters are handled, I think, is really important to the opening of the game for setting the story. Because yeah, the Deku Tree has his moments. The manner in which he speaks the cool Old English, that's very interesting, but then his passing, how that is handled, how Navi responds to that. And then with Saria, the interactions you have with her, they have to demonstrate this relationship between Link and Saria. That needs to be shown. And the moment when Link leaves, there's something somber to that as well. So the tone is really important for the beginning of Ocarina of Time, and while I do believe it's extremely likely that there's going to be voice acting, that execution is important, and so it's interesting to think about how that might be handled. But just thinking about the overall experience of Kokiri Forest, there are some things I noticed that definitely need to be changed. So, like in the opening of the game, the room is pre-rendered, and there was a lot of areas like this in the original Ocarina of Time, and they fixed a lot of this with the 3DS version. But yes, all the rooms need to be rendered in full 3D. I think that's a basic expectation, but also having a full analog camera. In other words, you can use your right stick to move around the camera as we've come to expect from most third-person games nowadays. This is something that you should be able to do from the very beginning. And there's a lot of details that can be added here. Something that I noticed that I found to be kind of funny, but you know, I forgive it given that this was an early game that came out back in 1998, an early 3D game. Link has a window right by where he sleeps. And if you go outside and look by the back of the tree, where the window would be, there is no window. So little details like that I think need to be fixed to help with the immersion. The idea of this would be for it to be a modern remake, so they have to go at it with that extra level of attention to detail that people now expect from modern games. And so when you go out into the world, when you check the Lost Woods, and you look at the backgrounds for the Kokiri Forest, we're going to want to see better environments rendered, of course. Like, from a visual perspective, we're expecting something modern here. But this goes beyond just the looks of things. In Kokiri Forest, in the original, you could see the little fairies that were next to each Kokiri, but you couldn't see the characters themselves, each individual Kokiri, until you got right next to them. I imagine this was done on purpose, so they wouldn't have to render as much on screen at a time. But now, with far more modern hardware, that shouldn't be a limitation. So, less pop-in, characters noticeable from further away, better draw distance, all those things that should be expected. But it goes beyond that too. It's not just about the characters popping in when you get right next to them, but it's how they respond to you. Most of the characters have single animations, and it doesn't really make sense. So there need to be more animations added depending on what's going on. Like if you talk to a character, they're going to move about their hands and their legs and their gestures in different ways depending on what's happening with the conversation, and if Link is interacting with them or not. Or we take a look at a lot of modern Zelda games now, like the Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom games. If you swing your weapon by someone, oftentimes they will respond. Things like this should also happen in the remake. They should put in more animations and make the characters, the NPCs, more reactive to you and the environment. That's going to add a lot more to the immersion. Now, when I'm exploring through Kokiri Forest, there are some different things I'm thinking about. Do they need to add more to this environment? I actually like that there isn't too much going on in this beginning area. You can get everything done fairly quick. It serves as a proper tutorial. Of course, you do revisit it later on into the game, and there are elements in there that you revisit that are certainly interesting when there's more context added. But should there be perhaps maybe some mini-games, more character interactions? That I wonder about. Like, I definitely would want to see a little bit more interactions with Saria. Maybe they can add a little bit more there. Maybe they could add a couple mini-games here and there if they really want to flesh things out, if that's how ambitious this remake is going to be. A few other thoughts that came to mind, like when I picked up the sword, and I was reminded of the chest opening animation, and as you pick up different new items and you see that, are they going to get rid of that? And I don't think they should. Maybe they speed it up a little bit. But if you're just finding an item for the very first time, I think that's pretty understandable. Just as long as you only see that animation for the very first time. I think that's fine, but it is something I thought about when I ran into these items in the beginning. But also, when I got my sword, something else I thought about is if maybe they could add in like a character interaction where they teach you how to use the sword. And I thought about for some time, like maybe they could do something really cool, like perhaps one of the Kokiri would say, oh, I don't know how to use a sword, but there's this skeleton in the Lost Woods that does, and so you go into Lost Woods and you run into a Stalfos, but a peaceful one, that perhaps nods to the Stalfos that trains you in Twilight Princess. Like, there could be some interesting lore implications there if they were to go in that direction, but ultimately I don't think they would do that. I don't think it would be that necessary to add a tutorial. The sword gameplay is relatively easy to understand. However, However, I also do think about that if they are going to modernize this, there probably are going to be some changes. Perhaps Link will have a manual jump, not an auto jump. We already mentioned the camera earlier. Maybe there's a little bit of a stamina meter, which might matter, and I'll explain why. At first, you might think that's a bad thing. I think it will be a good thing. I'll get to that. But things like that would impact how the gameplay works, and maybe they would want to put in another character or interaction where they help teach you a little bit of these mechanics before moving on. There are various Zelda games after Ocarina of Time that do have a character that teaches you how to fight, so it wouldn't be that crazy. It's definitely a possibility. But something else that comes to mind as I'm thinking about the possibility of adding more characters to teach Link, a lot of the characters are repeats or very, very similar. I think that they would redesign a lot of these characters so there's more variation, so you see a lot of unique Kokiri as opposed to just the repeating same character 4, 5, 6 times. This would help with the immersion and believability of the world. Now, once Link heads to the Deku Tree, the passageway there is fairly minimal. I do kind of think they should add to it a little bit more, make it a bit longer, make it feel like an actual journey deeper into the forest. Because you kind of just go through like a very basic hallway, make it feel more natural, more flowy, more trees and things of that nature. I definitely think that's something they should do. I'm not asking for them to make it like a giant field you have to explore or a giant forest before you get to the tree, but add a little bit more, make it feel like a natural progression. And then once you get into the tree, the first dungeon of the game, the introductory dungeon to the game, I think some people will certainly debate this. The way I envision this remake, and again, we don't know exactly what it's going to be yet, but the way I envision this remake is to be something that is kind of along the lines of what Capcom has done with the Resident Evil remakes, and that's that there are going to be changes, structural changes. It's not like you can't play Ocarina of Time on current Nintendo platforms now. Ocarina of Time is available on Nintendo Classics. I actually think it would be far more interesting if they were to rethink the dungeons a little bit here. I think they should still maintain the essence, the spirit of it all, and there should be certain elements that should maintain. Like, I still think there should be the Deku Scrubs, I still think all the different enemies involved, that Queen Goma should still be the final boss. The big surprise, the puzzle you solve by jumping very high down through a web, like, all that should still be a part of it. But if Link is going to have slightly different abilities, like a stamina meter where he can dash and climb, and while climbing be able to dash quicker, which would also help with the flow, because climbing around in Ocarina of Time can actually be kind of annoying and slow, so adding a meter, a stamina meter, where you can dash through or jump through would actually make more sense. Thinking about the level layout where you have the manual jump as opposed to an auto jump also would make sense, so providing different rooms or challenges that have remixed a bit with these things in mind, I think would make a lot of sense. Now, something else about this game that I anticipate we'll see what actually happens is that they're going to use this game as an opportunity to modernize the combat here. Again, this is me kind of operating under the assumption they're remaking this game in a bigger way. If they're not, then what I'm saying here would be irrelevant. But with this assumption in mind that they might be revamping the combat for the Zelda series here, I don't actually think there would be substantial changes so early on beyond what I've already mentioned. But I do think there might be perhaps a little bit more of a focus on the timing of things and how you fight these different enemies. Like, when we do fight Queen Goma, you can actually beat her with one combo right at the beginning, as opposed to a lot of bosses, especially in Zelda games, where you usually have to go at them 3 times. I think they're going to restructure that a bit. I think they're going to adjust some of the enemy AIs so they respond a little bit differently. You have to think a little bit more about your timing, which I think will be better for the overall flow of combat for the game. And I do think Goma should be a bit more challenging. I'm not saying ridiculously challenging here. This is still the introduction to the game, and Nintendo still wants to design this game in a way where most people can play through it, maybe offer actual multiple difficulties. I think that would be one way to go about doing this. But Queen Goma being easily beaten in seconds, I think that should change. Like, the look, the tone, the atmosphere of that battle is very epic, but beating her in seconds, well, I think they gotta do a little bit more than that. And just on the note of Queen Goma, like the Deku Scrubs reference her a few different times, I would love to see a little bit more of that. There are a few conversations you have with the Deku Scrubs, maybe those could even be voice acted scenes, and maybe they could add a little bit more to the dialogue there to just give us a little bit more of a background understanding of what's going on. Maybe there are things in the environment that kind of reference this kingdom ran by Queen Goma. she's a queen after all. So some of the rooms could even be referencing some of that. Maybe there are Deku Scrubs that are helping some of the eggs hatch. There's some cool things they could add in if they wanted to go that far. But I also think they should make sure to, again, maintain the essence of what the Deku Tree dungeon was, and even some really cool references, like the Deku Scrub has this code they tell you, 231, 23 is number 1. That's a reference to Michael Jordan. Remember, this game came out in the 90s when Michael Jordan was largely relevant. His number was 23. Michael Jordan, for many, is considered to be the greatest basketball player of all time. So having cool references like that stay in here would be really nice to see. But that pretty much sums up my thoughts on changes they could put into the beginning, the very beginning, for The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. What do you all think? And would you like to see more videos like this? Should I continue this series and make a video about each part and changes we can maybe see depending on the direction Nintendo goes with this remake? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.